Well, good evening, everyone. We're just going to give it another minute so everyone can get on. Okay, looks like the numbers have been steady, so we will go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is our 10th community meeting for this project. Believe it or not, it's been a just over a year or so, 2 years now. Losing track of time. Yeah, my name is Kaylee Mahalko, and I'm one of the community liaisons for the project, along with Jeff Barlett. If you want to say hello, Jeff.
Hello, everyone. If I haven't met you yet, Jeff Barilla. I'm, as Kaylee said, the second community liaison on this project. Feel free to reach out to either of us if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And on behalf of ourselves and the project partners, thank you for taking time to be here with us and learn more about the Kinneytown Dam Removal Project. We know that this project has generated a lot of interest throughout the Valley communities, and we appreciate your engagement and participation in this process. Whether you've been following the project for years or if this is your first time hearing about it, we are glad that you're here. Before we begin, I'm going to go over the agenda so you know what's coming up. After our welcome, we are going to do a brief project overview, just the kind of the history and the settings so everyone's on the same page as to how we got here. Then we're going to give some project progress and status updates on various parts of the project. And then we're going to have one of our engineers, Scott with GEI, to talk to us about sediment specifically. And then we'll move into the question and answer session. Thank you to the people who submitted questions in advance. We'll begin by answering those questions that were submitted during the registration process, and then open the floor to additional questions if time allows. Thank you to those who submitted ahead of time during registration. Please note that during the Q&A session, you have two ways to submit your question. First, you can type it into the chat area, and we will read those aloud. Otherwise, you can use the raise hand feature, and we will call on you, and you can come off mute and ask your question. We'll wrap up with some closing remarks and next steps and opportunities to stay informed. And at this time, I would like to recognize Anne-Marie Dragonis, First Select Woman of Seymour, who has joined us tonight. And I'll turn the mic over to you, Anne-Marie.
Oh, thank you. Before we begin, I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone who's been working on this Kinneytown Dam. This has been a major effort, and we are so grateful for the time that has been spent on it, the expertise, the dedication from so many people from engineering, NVCOG, our residents, basically from the town officials. I'd like to thank them as well. This is an important issue for our community, and we appreciate the care and commitment being put into it, especially taking the time to answer all our residents' questions. For Seymour, the Kinneytown Dam is more than an old piece of infrastructure. It's a reminder of our industrial past, but also it's an opportunity to shape our a healthier river, basically. This project is about restoring fish passage, improving the river environment, addressing some safety concerns, some major safety concerns that were there, and reconnecting our community to one of the most important natural resources, the river. It requires careful work, which you guys have all done. And we are so proud of each and every one of you, and we cannot wait to see this project end, not because we want you out of our town, but because we cannot wait to see the outcome of it. It's amazing. My husband's cousin, Scott Dragonis, was a big opponent of the Kinneytown Dam people, and he wanted to bring the river back to the way it was. He was an avid fisherman. So we cannot wait to see this project done. So thank you all.
And thank you, Ms. First Select Woman. Now I'm going to pass it over to our project team, starting with Aaron.
Thanks, Kaylee. I'm Aaron Budrus. I'm the Director of Environmental Planning at Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments. I'll be joined by Paul Woodworth, Senior Director of Ecological Restoration at Save the Sound. We're sort of co-leading this project between our two agencies. And we'll be joined in a little bit by Scott Dirks, who is an engineer with GEI Engineering, our consultants on the dam removal project. So why are we removing Kinneytown Dam? So Kinneytown Dam, really served a very important purpose in the Naugatuck Valley for a long time. It was originally constructed in the 1840s to divert water from the Naugatuck River into a canal that led to downtown, downtown Ansonia, where that water drove industry for over a century. Later on, the facility was converted to produce hydroelectricity and send that electricity to the grid. And it was regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, as a small hydro project. So it provided electricity to the grid for decades, providing power to residences and businesses in the valley. But today, Kinneytown Dam doesn't serve any useful purpose. It hasn't produced electricity since 2013 at one of the generating units, and since 2020, it hasn't produced any electricity at all. The previous owners made very little investment, and more recently, no investment at all in maintenance. So it's out of compliance with its FERC license. The cost of bringing the facility back online in compliance with its FERC license far outweighs the revenue that it could ever produce selling power to the grid. It's in really poor condition, and it's just not commercially viable as a power generator. And that's not just us saying it, the people that want to remove the dam. The previous owners made serious efforts to sell the facility as well. But the market came to the same conclusion. It just does not make any sense as a hydro facility in that location. So the previous owner was effectively abandoning it. And the facility was just continuing to fall further and further into disrepair. So, for 175 years or so, Kinneytown Dam really did serve a valuable purpose in the valley, and now it provides no benefit at all, but it's having serious negative social, economic, and environmental impacts. And, the only real way to remedy all of those impacts is to remove the dam.
So in addition to the financial straits that this structure and this facility is put into, there's quite a few benefits to removing the dam. Save the Sound works on dam removal in a lot of different locations, and this project is one of our biggest and most potentially impactful. Restoring the benefit to fish passage, the migratory fish species that are likely to benefit from 30 plus miles of main stem river habitat and 30 more for tributary habitat is a pretty substantial lift for a single project. We're also capitalizing on the benefits of the upstream investments that have been made. There's a bypass channel at the Ting Dam. There are multiple dams removed upstream, all providing fish access and reducing safety hazards. This project also will engender some reduction in flood risks to the neighborhoods in Seymour upstream of the dam, which are currently subject to some nuisance flooding. This would lower water surface elevations during some of those smaller events and reduce some of that nuisance flooding. There's also health and safety concerns associated with the canal and obviously the sediment that is built up behind the dam. We're also looking to restore access to the Naugatuck River with reconnecting the greenway that's existing down in Ansonia and Derby area and bringing that all the way up into downtown Seymour. With this removal, and the increased fishery will have improvement in sport fishing. In addition to the access to do the fishing in areas that are currently not accessible, we'll also have a broader fish community to fish from. And then in the longer term, sort of a bigger picture ecological effect is restoring the natural sediment flow of the river that's been held back for so many years. So quite a few environmental benefits to this project.
So, we've been working on this project for a few years, and we're just going to give you a quick overview of what the project entails. We have acquired the facility through the Connecticut Brownfield Land Bank. That was really the first step, was to take ownership of the property. We've been working on the engineering and design of the removal. We need to relocate sewer infrastructure that's owned by the town of Seymour that goes underneath the river upstream of the dam. One of the big issues with dam removals, and this one in particular, is managing the sediment that's built up behind the dam. We're going to talk a lot more about that in a little bit. We need to work through FERC, the federal agency that oversees the project, to decommission it. They have to give the go-ahead to do so, and we're ultimately going to remove the dam, which is actually 2 dams that are part of this project. Once the dams are gone, we're going to restore the Naugatuck River. As Paul said, develop recreational access to the river, and extend the Naugatuck River Greenway Trail. And we're committed all along this process to engage with stakeholders and residents throughout the entire project.
As restoration is one of the major goals here, we've got a few guiding principles. We're obviously going to follow all the applicable laws and regulations that are both state and at the state and federal level. We're looking to protect the environment and wildlife. This comes part and parcel with dealing with the sediment in a responsible manner. We're obviously trying to protect the infrastructure that's going to remain. So that's Route 8 and the Waterbury rail line on either side of the river. Both of those pieces of infrastructure need to be protected in the long term. We need to leave the entire property in a safe state. So the footprint of the Kinneytown Dam and the powerhouse, that area, as well as Coe Pond and the area surrounding the Ansonia structure. And ultimately, we're trying to provide safe public access, perhaps under the existing bridges that are there now along the rail line, and with the overarching goal of restoring river ecology.
So we have put together quite a bit of funding for this project. We understand we still don't have enough money to do the entire project yet, but we got started with a pretty big grant in 2023 from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, who gave us a $15 million grant. With the state of federal affairs right now, they've informed us that they're going to be withholding a fair amount of that we have not spent yet. It's a little over $10 million. But that's really not going to stop the progress that we're making right now. We've found a bunch of other funding that we have committed to the project. We have funding from Connecticut DEP through their supplemental environmental program of $1.6 million. It's going to sort of fill that gap in the short term, so that we can continue with our design work and sediment management work. We've had a huge commitment from EPA's Targeted Brownfield Assessment Program, and we're going to talk about some of the information that they were able to gather for us that's going to inform the sediment management and the dam removal. We have quite a bit of congressionally directed spending that's been allocated to the project. We have funding through the DEP Rec Trails program for trail design of the Naugatuck River Greenway through the property. You may have seen in the news this past week, we've been awarded $4 million through the DECD Municipal Brownfield Program to help us get started with the sediment management. And the really big thing is the state legislature has committed $25 million in state bond funds to this project. So, we have a total committed amount of 53 million, minus, I guess, that 10.3 million. And we're continuing to look for additional funding and find additional commitments from other partners as well. But we have plenty of funding in place to continue with the project in the foreseeable future. This is just a timeline. This has changed a little bit over the past 2 years since we've been doing these meetings. but, basically, we have already, commenced the design in 24 and 25. We've done quite a bit of testing. EPA has done quite a bit of sediment testing for us. We acquired the property. This year, we've been working on a sediment management plan, and that'll be finalized this year. The design is going to continue. We're expecting to contract with a construction contractor early in the process so that they can have some say in how the project gets done, and we can use their expertise in finalizing the design. We'll start the permitting and FERC decommissioning process this year as well. The sewer siphon design work is going to conclude. And then, construction should commence next year and in 2028. And hopefully by 2029, we'll be looking at a restored Naugatuck River. So just to give some updates on some of the major parts of the project. The biggest movement in the past several months, for us at least, has been the work we've had to do now that we've taken ownership of the property through the Connecticut Brownfield Land Bank. They acquired the property in October of last year. We have sent, the land bank did send encroachment letters to several properties or residents who were encroaching on the property. We submitted a transfer of hydropower exemption to FERC. So the Connecticut Brownfield Land Bank now holds the hydropower license. So, the previous owner had been ordered to do, a whole list of things by FERC, very few of which they ever did or were interested in doing. A lot of those pertain to restoring the hydro power facility and restoring power generation. We know that's not possible, and it really doesn't make sense in the context of us removing the dam. So we asked FERC for regulatory relief for several of those items. They concurred, but Connecticut Brownfield Land Bank is still responsible for the safety and compliance on a lot of safety issues. So, over the past several months, NBCOG staff on behalf of Connecticut Brownfield Land Bank has been securing the property. So we've been going around changing locks, fixing gates, fixing fences that have been cut or are, in bad shape. We've been posting no trespassing signs. Neighbors may have seen those going up. Even though our ultimate goal is to provide public access and make this a recreation destination. And we understand that people are using the property for recreation or have in the past. It really is not safe. So, while we go through this process, we are going to be enforcing the no trespassing on the property. We've hired a landscaper to do some cleanup around the generating stations. They went out and did some initial brush clearing early this spring, and they'll be going back periodically to keep it up as rough lawn around those facilities. We're also going to be doing litter and brush removal along the canal, especially in Ansonia and around Coe Pond. A lot of trash has accumulated over the years. We really want to be better neighbors than the previous owners. Right now, we're in the process of hiring a facility operator, so somebody that manages hydro facilities, as on the day-to-day basis, and somebody that can help us deal with the FERC regulations that we need to comply with. They'll also be doing the safety inspections going forward. Our staff and Save the Sound staff has been sort of filling the gap, and when there's a big storm or periodically we're going out and inspecting and making sure that everything looks safe. But in the future, this operator that we hire is going to be doing that. And we're also going to be developing an emergency action plan. So, if the dam were to fail, while we're undergoing this process over the next couple of years, having a way to notify downstream communities and make sure that we know who to call and how to make it safe. So that's about it for site management update. On the Seymour Sewer relocation portion of the project, we've hired CDM Smith Consulting Engineers, who's doing the design to move those two sewer siphons that go underneath the river upstream of the dam. The flow from those two are going to have to be rerouted to a new siphon below the dam. So last year we went to the town, presented a preferred alternative that the town approved. CDM's through 30% design, on their way to about 60% design. They've held a permitting pre-application meeting a few months ago. They've met with all the regulators and have a path forward on permitting. And we're expecting the design to advance to a point where they'll be submitting their permit applications later this summer. And like I said earlier, we're committed to doing, really robust community engagement on this project. We want input from the public. We want everybody to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. So, we have 2 community liaisons that are available to talk to residents or stakeholders. We've done neighborhood canvassing in the past, trying to get more people to these meetings, and we'll continue that in the future. We've moved these meetings to quarterly. We started off, every other month, just so, we're not repeating ourselves, and, we know your time is valuable, so we don't want to bring you out to these too often, but we are going to continue holding these quarterly meetings. We have a monthly newsletter that goes out. If you're not on that list, you can sign up on our website. We also started doing downstream outreach to the communities downstream, the industries at the mouth of the Housatonic that may be impacted by the dam removal. We've started early outreach to them as well. Save the Sound is working on a documentary film. It's going to be a 3-part film. They've shot some interviews with residents of the Lower Valley for the first film, which is going to really be about the history of the Naugatuck River. So we're hoping to have, something, pretty soon for our team to look at, and hopefully we can get out to the public as soon as possible. And then, the future 2 parts of the film will be about our project, and then, looking at, impacts post dam removal. So that's pretty exciting. And we've been promoting the idea of holding a workshop where the public can, more, engage a little bit more with the project team and give their feedback on, some of the things that, we really do want to hear from the public about, like future reuses of the project, impacts to the neighbors and things like that. We hope to have that workshop this summer. Because of the delay in some of the sediment management work that we've been doing, that's really going to dictate, what will be possible on the project, on the property going forward. We've postponed that. Now we expect it, probably in the fall, so possibly October, where we'll have an in-person, it'll be fully in-person, and we'll have, plenty of opportunity for the public to interact with us, give us feedback, and hopefully, help guide the project going forward. If anybody needs any information about the project, you can go to our website. It's nvcogct.gov/Kinneytown. There's links to a lot of the documents we've been talking about, to all of the previous presentations we've given, to the story map that's up there that really, is sort of an engaging way to learn about the project. So, please, I'll direct you there to learn more.
And in a few minutes, we'll have Scott Dirk speak up on behalf of GEI's, our engineering team. They've been involved in data collection and survey and bathymetry last year. That was wrapped up at the end of the year. And then have been actively working with us on regulatory permitting and engaging with the various agencies, including the Army Corps of Engineers, FERC, DEEP, and DOT. They've completed a decent amount of hydrologic and hydraulic modeling, and we'll be talking more today about our sediment management effort. Aaron, next slide. I think we have a couple just visuals of the impoundment. Were it not for sediment at this dam, this would be probably a much more straightforward and less costly project. The vast majority of the funds we're trying to raise are to responsibly manage this amount of sediment behind it. The upper left image shows this sort of pillowy like dune-like surface. That's essentially the superficial sediment that is basically filled this impoundment. And it is mobilized and transported over in larger flow events. The upper right is what it looks like when we were able to draw down water for the sake of safety and repairs to the spillway. And the lower right-hand corner shows how shallow it is, very close to the dam. So that image is showing the spillway on the left-hand side of that image, and that's our staff on the right-hand side installing the safety line, basically in knee-deep water, and we're only about 50 feet upstream of a 25-foot high dam. So not an insignificant volume, and Scott will go into more detail. So next slide, Aaron. As Aaron had mentioned, EPA. Oh, and then of course I can't forget about Coe Pond, which is another interesting and complicating factor of this project. Coe Pond also has a decent amount of sediment that's some of which is exposed there in that delta in that image there. Coe Pond also has contamination concerns, actually greater than what we find in Kinneytown, or behind the Kinneytown impoundment itself. And of course, Coe Pond is fed by the dam. So it is likely not to exist as a pond once this project is finished. Next slide, Aaron. Yeah, so we have EPA has been involved in the assessments. The phase 1 assessment was more focused on the structures and the footprint around the structures. Phase 2 became an investigation of sediment. And then we had a supplemental phase 2 assessment that looked in more detail at various depths for us to better characterize the distribution of contamination through the depth and across the impoundment in Kinneytown. And it's with those sets of data that we're able to move our sediment management plan ahead. And from there, I think I will pass it to you, Scott.
Great. Thanks, Paul and Aaron. Let's see if I get this. Oops. See if I get the sharing right this time. No. Okay, hold on. Bear with me. Come on. Do you see my first slide? The title slide?
I see your the presenter view, I believe. So I see your first slide and your second slide.
Is that what's going out to everybody? I'm so confused.
Yeah, if you go up to the top, it should allow you to switch.
If you go to display settings and that drop down there, I think you can swap presenter view and slideshow, and that should set you up.
There we go.
There you go.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you. All right, good evening, everybody. Again, my name is Scott Dirks, one of the technical leads on this project for GEI. Appreciate the opportunity to present these updates, both on sediment management, but also on channel design. They really go hand in hand. So I wanted to start off with a slide that I believe Aaron presented at the last community meeting. I really like this slide because it shows, let me see if I can the other thing I want to do is laser pointer. So you can see my laser pointer now? I'm going to assume that's yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. So what I like about this project is that you kind of see the history of what occurs behind a dam in terms of sediment. And the first thing I want to point out is this, basically you see this coarser material at the bottom, both above the dam and below the dam. And this is meant to represent the old channel bed. So this is where the channel resided before the dam was placed. So it's a nice representation of that because we are basically seeing the same thing in the Kinneytown Dam, that we can estimate where the channel was, both how deep it was and then where it was across the channel, so to speak. And over time, after the dam is installed, you get these waves of sediment that come in. So the oldest sediment, and in this case, the actual channel bed would be the oldest sediment, potentially laid down 10 or 15,000 years ago, when the glaciers last retreated. And then you get these waves of sediment that build up. So the oldest sediment on the bottom, slightly newer as you go up to the very top. And you saw pictures of that were great representations of the fact that that sediment that's sitting at the top, even though there is a dam there, some of that sediment occasionally moves and some of that sediment occasionally goes over the dam. It's a natural process. So there's still some sediment that moves over the dam. So that would be obviously the youngest sediment, at least in terms of what we see at the dam. And another reason I bring that up is because the dam itself has been breached and rebuilt a couple of times. The most significant was the hurricane in 55, breached the dam at that time, and the dam was completely rebuilt. And when the dam was breached, of course, all that sediment, at least to the point at which the breach elevation occurred, all that sediment would have been lost downstream. So we had, a replacement, so to speak, of sediment over time with those breaches. So the other reason I wanted to start with that slide first is, in a sense, the design process and the sediment management process kind of starts from the bottom up. We want to try to understand where that old riverbed was. And we did this in a couple of ways. And there were a lot of different groups involved in this, including Save the Sound. This is another consultant working with us, Interfluve. And then this is EPA and Volpe out grabbing sediment samples. But when they were grabbing sediment samples, they had this mechanical equipment that would drive their borings down through the sediment. And I don't know if you can see this, but this material here is relatively fine, is mostly sand all the way through. And then when you get towards the bottom, you can see this coarser material. And this essentially represents that old riverbed where the channel used to be. Another technique that we used was basically essentially driving these very thin steel probes through the sediment until you hit what we call refusal, which is, again, knowing that a sediment at the bottom of the channel tended to be coarser. And in some cases, it may even be bedrock, right? We don't always know. But by driving these rods through the sediment, and you can drive these rods quite deep, 15 feet, 16 feet, 17 feet by hand. If you use a little elbow grease, but developing essentially on the right-hand side now, this map, and all these points represent spots where either we took a boring and it went down to where we think the old stream bed was, or we used hand probes to reach that point, again, what we call refusal. And we call the whole map, the nickname, if you will, is the DOR, which stands for depth of refusal. And so we're essentially building a map of where the river used to be. So once we knew where the river used to be, that allowed us to develop a grading plan, and I'll explain that as I go. So this is just a snippet of the plans that we've been developing, and this is potentially what the channel would look like following dam removal, managing the sediment, taking sediment out, dealing with it in the way I'm going to describe as we go through this whole presentation. There's a lot more slides on this, but the blue represents the proposed channel behind the dam, and then the green is the floodplain. And while we have that DOR, that depth of refusal, the old stream bed mapped, you can't map every square foot of it, right? So something else that we use, a set of tools that we use to figure out how big does that channel need to be. I mean, one quick way is, what does the channel look like downstream? What does the channel look like upstream? But there are also some relationships, general relationships with stream design work, knowing how much water we have to deal with, knowing the slope. Those are all parameters that go into the design process. So we come up with an estimate of how big the channel needs to be, how deep the channel needs to be, and then how much room we have left for floodplain. And now this is an example where you can see these black lines represent the 1 foot increments vertically. So you can see these are the channel banks. They descend down to the channel bed, the proposed channel bed, and then you can see grading along the banks or the valley walls, if you will, of the channel. And this line represents, so to speak, a cut through this spot. And over here is the drawing in cross section. So this dashed line represents the valley walls. These are existing valley walls. You can see them on either side. And then the dash continues. It's a very irregular dash across the channel. And that represents the top of the sediment as it stands today. Down here, this gray line is developed from the DOR, the depth of refusal, the old channel bed. And so the plan, as you can see it now in cross section, is we're going to cut the channel down to the old channel bed so that theoretically this channel bed is going to be where it used to be. Now, it's not going to be exactly where it used to be because we don't know exactly where it is. So there's, some approximation here. But the idea is once we start dredging, once we start excavating, usually it's pretty apparent when you've hit that material. So you can imagine we're essentially going to go from sand to basically pebbles, cobbles, and in some cases it may even be bedrock. And then the channel height is placed at an elevation so that about once a year or once every other year, the river gets out onto its floodplain. That's a very natural condition. And once the river gets out onto its floodplain, the flows on the floodplain slow down. Basically the amount of force that the channel has to carry is dissipated by the flood flows that go over onto the floodplain. So now I just quickly want to transition to, if you were at the last public meeting, we presented this table then. And the important point, on the left-hand side, you can see some of the potential constituents that are in the sediment. And going back to the notion of the first sediment to fill is probably the oldest sediment. We have 3 boxes here. So we've got a box we're calling shallow sediment, which is from the top of the sediment to 4 feet below. We have the middle box, which starts 4 feet below and goes another 4 feet to 8 feet below. And then we've got the deeper sediment, which is below that 8-foot layer. Basically, what we're showing here is the potential for adverse ecological impacts. So red represents pretty much guaranteed ecological impact. So this is sediment, and you can see here 2 of the offenders are chromium and copper, which are part of the brass manufacturing process, right? So back in the day when they were manufacturing brass products in the Naugatuck Valley, These kinds of constituents were getting out into the river, settling in the sediment, settling behind the dam. So the newer sediment, the 0 to 4 sediment, the green means no ecological impact whatsoever. The yellow is potentially no impact, but there may be some marginal, and orange is marginal to some impact, but nowhere near the kind of intensity you see with these concentrations for the lower sediment. So we basically have 3 buckets, if you will. And this data, again, this data was developed by Volpe and EPA, who went out and did that sampling across the impoundment. And they would actually take sub-samples at depth and then have them analyzed so that we would know at what depth we were seeing these kinds of constituent concentrations. So now we've taken a snapshot, if you will, through the entire impoundment behind the dam. And the blue line represents the water surface elevation over the period of doing this work. You can see here, you don't actually see the dam, but this big drop represents the Kinneytown Dam, the 25-foot fall that water goes over. And I should have mentioned, this is this vertical scale is elevation in terms of these are 10-foot increments. And then this is just distance through the entire impoundment. Again, this is a snapshot, as if you'd cut a line from almost the Broad Street Bridge upstream through the dam. And now what you see is this gray line represents the top of sediment. The green line is just if you were to estimate where the bottom of the river was from a simple straight line back towards Broad Street Bridge all the way to the bottom of the dam, that's what it might look like. The individual points are the DOR investigation. So each of these points represents a depth to refusal. Now you'll note they're at different elevations, but that's because the bottom, depending on where you are across the entire river, the bottom is going to vary quite a bit. And what we're trying to do is figure out where is the lowest point in each section all the way across the river. You'll notice some of these points are really low. And what we have found, particularly from the last round of sampling, was because they were using mechanical. So the red dots are basically, those are hand probes. Those are, again, you could imagine that metal rod I showed an image just a couple slides ago being pushed down until it hits a refusal. And then the yellow points are the mechanically driven borings. And what we have deduced from the first round of sampling and now the second round of sampling is these points represent borings that were pushed mechanically through the old bottom of the channel. So based on all the data that we've collected, our estimate of the depth of refusal is this, basically this interface here. I'm showing the sediment above, and then where that sediment ends is the depth of refusal. And you can see there's some interesting things going on here. It looks like we have a fairly gradual slope upstream, then we have this transition point, and we're not sure exactly what the transition point is, but there's a much steeper slope towards the dam. And we know the dam selection siting process, typically you want to put a dam where the bed slope is the highest. That way you're going to get the most power for your facility. So it seems to make sense from that perspective. We have a higher slope closer to the dam. What we're also showing here now are those 3 buckets of sediment. The top 4 feet of sediment is the lightest color, and that bucket, based on the grading plan and the depth of refusal, is the biggest bucket. So we're showing about 350,000 cubic yards A cubic yard is 1 yard by 1 yard by 1 yard, so 27 cubic feet. So it's already a pretty good sized increment, and there's 350,000 of those in that top layer. In the middle layer, and again, top layer is almost completely clean. We've got a few hits, copper and silver, but otherwise almost nothing is showing up in here. Or if it is showing up, it's at the same concentrations that you see upstream and downstream of the dam already. So it's basically sediment that's mobile, that's the youngest, and is already moving through the system and still getting over the dam, I'd add. So here we have the middle layer, which is almost 200,000 yards. And then we have the lowest layer, which is about another 100,000 yards, giving us a total of about 650,000 yards that we have to manage, that we essentially will have to touch in some way. So we met with Deep in May. It was not an official pre-application meeting, but it's basically an information meeting where we're sharing information and where, Deep is giving us their opinion before we get into the formal permitting process. And they really bought into some of the ideas that we had for sediment management, particularly the top 4 feet being a relatively clean layer. However, the one caveat, so by clean, I also mean it will potentially provide us the ability to use that sediment in a number of different ways that I'll describe here in the next few slides. But in order to provide an additional assurance that this material is clean, and by clean I mean does not cause toxicity to the smallest of organisms in the river, we're doing what's called toxicity testing. And so we're going to be gathering sediment samples from that top layer. We won't be, but there'll be a lab that then puts that sediment into bottles. And I've shown a little image here to give you an idea of the size and the scale of it. So sediment in the bottom, the water itself coming from the river, and then essentially this is I can't remember, I think it's a couple millimeters long, so kind of hard to see. It's a kind of crustacean, freshwater crustacean, eats algae. They will be placed in each of the containers. The containers will be lightly aerated, so there's always oxygen there. And then essentially we see what happens over a 10-day and 28-day time frame. Those are scientifically derived time frames for both what is called an potential acute toxicity and chronic toxicity. So essentially it's a lab test with little bits of the river, both the sediment and the water. The bugs are put in there, and then we see how they do. Right? If the sediment is clean enough, then potentially we have little to no toxicity. So this is the last part of the field program that will be happening here soon. The samples will be collected. The test will be set up, and then running them over those 10 and 28 day periods. So now moving on. Again, sediment management and the dam removal and the dam design, they all work together, so to speak. So everything at every step of the way, both in the removal process and in the restoring the channel process, we have to keep an eye on sediment. And first off, just I'm going to give you a kind of a very broad overview of the dam removal process and how it will potentially play out in Kinneytown. So first off, we will lower the river. We've got some pipes, some valves that we can use to lower the water level a little bit. And then at some point, we will have to start literally notching the dam. So this, you can see this is an excavator. It's basically got like a giant hammer on it, and it will literally be breaking apart the top of the dam, notching it, and that notching process will go very slowly. I mean, we're literally talking about a 2 to 3 month period of every day notching it a little bit more, 6 inches, 6 inches here, 6 inches there. Once we get to the point where Cove Pond no longer sees water, because the the flow into Cove Pond is actually because the dam is holding the water up 25 feet. And once we take that down just a couple of feet, it will no longer be fed by the river. And so Cove Pond is going to have a couple different functions. One will be where we're going to set up our staging area. That image of the sediment at the opening of the pond is where we will potentially be creating our treatment train, which I'll explain here in a little bit. And then the other thing we're going to do is we can't exactly put the channel back where we want it to be. So we're going to cut as the notching is done, as the drawdown occurs, we will be excavating a small channel to start to kind of train the river, if you will, where we're trying to keep it, because obviously we don't want it moving up against either valley wall. We can't afford that period, the end. So that'll be part of that process. We will have multiple control points for sediment. We believe we're going to be able to release some sediment downstream, but I think at this point it's going to be a pretty small proportion of the total sediment behind the dam, and it will only be sediment from that top 4-foot layer. So one of the things that we'll do below the dam is create, we call it a sediment trap. These are turbidity curtains. So these are, long curtains that are weighted at the bottom, have floats at the top, will go all the way down through the water column. We can't string them all the way across the river. Obviously, they won't be able to withstand the force of flow. So we create a set of barriers that push the water, that slow it down, that allow settling to happen, so that if there are inadvertent releases, we're controlling them. And the siphon project will actually create an access down here, and that will provide a way for the contractor on this job to actually excavate out sediment that gets trapped behind the curtains. So we will be monitoring something called turbidity. Turbidity is basically how turbid the water is, right? Clean water, you can see right through. Turbid water looks like coffee. And so we'll be continuously monitoring the water in Naugatuck River below the dam and keeping an eye on turbidity, so that if somebody doesn't actually see an inadvertent release, the continuous monitors will tell us if we're actually seeing more sediment than we're allowed to let go down. And there'll be a number of contingency measures to deal with that kind of issue. So again, back to the buckets. Again, the good news is more than half the sediment that we have to touch is essentially clean. And what that allows us to do is potentially release some of it. I've shown here, these are pretty rough estimates right now of where the sediment is going. We have a lot of design work to complete before we actually can narrow down these numbers. But 50,000 is close to about the amount of sediment that the river already transports downstream on an annual basis. And once the Naugatuck hits the Housatonic, this 50,000 number becomes more like a quarter to 1/5 the total sediment that the two rivers contribute downstream. So in the grand scheme of things, what we're talking about right now is not a lot of release downstream. Some, but most of the sediment, what we're probably going to be doing, what we're planning on doing, is using the sediment both within the impoundment, because once we cut down that floodplain, there are going to be areas where we have some contaminated sediment. Some of that contaminated sediment may come out. Some of it may get covered with the clean sediment. And then additionally, our plan is there's about 300,000 yards of sediment that we need to manage, that we need to get out of the river. That's those lower buckets. And the plan right now is to pump them to Copon to cover the more contaminated sediments. And then we will be placing at least another 4 feet. Part of that potentially the clean sediment from the river, and part of that may be additional clean cover like topsoil brought in, imported, so to speak, onto the site as another couple of feet to get us 4 feet of clean cover in Copond. And then lastly, again, because we have a narrow valley, narrow river, we have the highway on one side, the railroad on the other side. We may use some of the clean sediment to build up the valley walls, particularly the toe where the valley wall meets the floodplain. When we get to that point, we potentially will be building that up again as a way to manage the sediment, but also as a way to help stabilize those valley walls. So part of moving the sediment will potentially be by hydraulic dredge. Some of it will be mechanically with equipment as the impoundment dewaters. Because it's mostly sand, we believe after enough time we'll actually be able to drive equipment out into the impoundment to do work that way. But we will also be dredging. This is from another project we've worked on in Michigan, and these are the hydraulic dredge lines. So you send the sediment's basically liquefied with river water. It's pumped through the lines. The idea here is the canal may actually be filled before we start work due to the sewer project. We may be filling it as well, but essentially running those hydraulic dredge lines to Copond, setting up our dewatering operation and our treatment operation. And I won't go through all the details of this, but suffice to say, what we're doing is we're settling the sediment where then the water comes out of the sediment. We're separating it, and all that water will get treated so that this part of the treatment facility will be settling all the metals. And then that water will go to a series of filters. This is a multimedia filter to get out all the solids, if you will. And then this is granular activated carbon, which for anybody who has a Brita, this is a giant Brita. It will be a giant Brita, and it will take out essentially everything else. So all the organic chemicals, and then the waste of the treatment process will actually go, I'm not showing it here, but all the solid waste goes off-site to a landfill, and then the treated water goes back to the river. So all the sediment that makes its way to Copond will undergo dewatering and water treatment before the sediment is actually used as cover for the bottom of Copond. So finishing up here, just a couple more slides. This is a high-level conceptual schematic of what Copond might look like. We're going to catch the water. There's a small tributary that comes in. There's a couple stormwater ponds. We will, on top of the cover, create an open channel, if you will, an appropriately sized channel that will convey that water above the cover, the clean sediment, back down to the river. And then the entire area, depending on trail plans, right? Because the trail will probably come through here. But this will all be become a naturalized area. So naturalized upland, there'll be a little wetland area around the channel itself, and then there'll be the channel that will convey all that water so it doesn't seep down into through the cover and into the sediments below. Here's what that would look like in cross section. So now Coe Pond has this one small water feature with the wetlands. And then we've got about 300,000 yards of dredge sediment now sitting on top of the old Coe Pond sediment, and then 4 feet of clean sediment cover over the top. And the river itself, here now is the channel cut down to the depth of refusal to the old riverbed. Here is the floodplain, and here is, again, potentially some of the clean sediment, that top 4 feet of sediment used to buttress both those valley walls and the infrastructure that sits on top. And that's it for the presentation. I think Aaron already covered some of these dates. Finishing up sediment management plan this fall, finishing up our draft design drawings also in the fall, starting our pre-application meetings at that time when we're essentially have the plan and the drawings ready to distribute to the agencies, and then potentially, as Aaron said, soliciting a contractor bid this winter to start what we call the design build process. And I've been doing this for almost 30 years. I've worked with lots of different contractors, and I will just say they almost always can come up with better, more efficient ways to do things than I can. So I welcome the process of bringing in and these are going to be substantial. These are contractors that work all over the states, that probably work globally, who have a lot of experience with this. And so we'll get the plans in a state where we think we've got a pretty good idea of how everything's going to go. The contractor will come in and say, well, I've got some better ideas on how we need to do this. And we'll incorporate those ideas as we finalize the plans and apply for permits. And that's it. That's my presentation. And now I think,
Finally, I think you're all set. Thank you. And we see
Yeah.
the discussion and questions again. Excuse me. So thank you very much for that presentation to the project team and to Scott and GEI. We're moving into the Q&A portion of the presentation tonight. I want to just remind everyone that there are 2 ways to ask questions. You could put it in the chat and we will read it out loud, and then the project team will answer to the best of their ability. Or you can raise your hand and come off mute and you can ask your question. We can go over to that next question. So these are the questions that were submitted during the registration process, and some of the topics that we're going to be covering before we move into the open floor. So you guys could start putting questions into the chat or raise your hand while we're covering the ones that are on the screen.
So I could jump in here. Aaron and I will sort of tag team. We'll bring in Scott as necessary. Scott kind of just described this first question pretty well. What is being done about the discharge from Colony Pond, which currently drains into Coe Pond? We're calling it Colony Pond Brook, although it doesn't have that official name, but that's what we're calling it. And that was that main channel feature that Scott depicted in that figure that shows it sort of running around the circumference or the perimeter of Coe Pond now, and then discharging likely, we think, in the same, more or less the same footprint as where the spillway is now. And what that spillway is going to look like, or how deeply it's going to be notched or breached, we're not exactly sure, but probably modified or breached in some way is where that stream is likely to discharge back to the Naugatuck River. That second bullet, will this plan impact water quality during the removal? And as Scott said, yes, we're going to be monitoring turbidity and have a downstream sediment trap. So those are it's pretty expected to have some, as diligent as we are about trying to excavate sediment. There's almost always some turbidity that's created during that process, whether you're hydraulically dredging with pipes or whether you're mechanically excavating with excavators. But the point of the drawdown and the notching in the pilot channel is that it dewaters a lot of the impoundment very early on, and so the work and the flow of the water can get concentrated into a smaller area, leaving lots of the impoundment dry and allowed to dewater without rushing water over it. So it really reduces the amount of surface area that is contributing to the turbidity. So that's going on. And obviously, under existing conditions, the dam now is a reason for water quality impacts. It's why water quality is degraded, or one of the reasons why water quality is degraded in the Naugatuck Valley. The dam is acknowledged by DEEP as one of the contributing factors. And so in the post-removal world, where dam is removed, sediments are managed, water quality is anticipated to improve in terms of its temperature, because the dam is elevating its temperature and reducing dissolved oxygen at the very basic level. And those free-flowing conditions of the river, when the dam is removed, will have those two metrics improved and turbidity return to normal in post-removal conditions. Aaron, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, but go ahead.
Nope. I think that was a pretty good answer.
Okay.
I can take that third
Paul,
one.
Yeah.
could you speak on the turbidity in relation to like normal turbidity levels, like say during a heavy storm, so the public
Yeah.
knows like how different this is going to be?
Yeah, certainly. During a sediment dredging operation, it's likely to produce turbidity levels that are somewhat comparable to what we see during a flood event. And especially as it moves downstream, and then where the confluence with Housatonic, there would be a significant amount of dilution happening there, so it would not be as noticeable in the Housatonic. But that's usually what it's seen, and there's been a decent amount of studies that sort of compiled this turbidity effects and found that a lot of the turbidity generated during dam removal construction operations was comparable to the turbidity events observed during regular flood events in the same river system. So yeah, that's what it's likely to replicate. So Aaron, if you wanted to talk about Olson Drive and Ansonia there.
Sure. Does the enhancement of the river include the area of Olson Drive and Ansonia and provide for river access within the city? So our project limits basically end at around North 4th Street in Ansonia on the southern end. I do know that the city right now, the city of Ansonia is going through a design process for a section of the Naugatuck River Greenway along Olson Drive and then a spur trail up to Nolan Field. I do not know for sure whether that includes river access within the city, but you can reach out to the city to ask that question. We do really, we want to connect this project to the neighborhood at the southern end of our project area. And part of the funding that we got from Connecticut DEP to design the Naugatuck River Greenway Trail through the project area is going to look at, part of that funding is going to be used to look at conceptual ideas of how to connect that trail into downtown. So we'll certainly be looking at that. And we really hope that this project is sort of a catalyst to other projects in the area, possibly economic development projects, or neighborhood improvement projects, to sort of, extend the reach of our improvements that we're making.
Thanks, Aaron. Fourth bullet there on the left is will the salmon return once the dam is removed? Will a proper fish ladder be installed? So just to be clear, salmon don't exist in the migratory form in any real numbers in Connecticut anymore. There have been many years of attempting to restore a salmon run in the Connecticut River, and those attempts have been abandoned a few years back by deep fisheries, partly because water temperatures were not suitable for Atlantic salmon. Atlantic salmon still exist in Maine, and there's stronger runs up north, but there's no longer an attempt to sort of restore salmon in Connecticut and southern New England. However, we are doing this project to restore 5 other migratory fish that are part of our natural ecosystem and are in really depleted stocks right now. And so that's American shad, that's blueback herring, that's alewife, that's sea lamprey, and that's American eel. So all 5 of those fish are migratory. They don't migrate all in the same way. American eel are a bit different, but those are all migratory fish that are anticipated to benefit from this project. And as I said, 30 miles of main stem habitat for all 5 of them, and then about 30 or so miles of tributary habitat that would be suitable for the American eel and sea lamprey. Salmon are stocked in the upper reaches of the Naugatuck, and I believe that will continue. I don't think that this project will improve or affect that stocking operation directly in any way that we know of. The next question there, why? Oh, and then the sub question to that is, will a proper fish ladder be installed? Well, we're looking to, there is a fish ladder there now. It never really worked well, is totally dysfunctional at this point. It stopped working when hydropower activity ceased because it relied on the operation of the hydropower in order for it to work. So that fish ladder is as defunct as the dam is at large. And so once we remove the dam, there won't be a need for a fish ladder anymore, and we will get full fish passage without the issues of a technical fish ladder. So moving to the right column, why not leave part of the dam to make pollution-free power? We need clean electric power. We certainly do. There's a broader effort to try to diversify our green and sort of non-polluting sources of energy in the state and obviously across the country. And there is an organization that's working with that to try to find a good balance between where hydropower fits into that. The problem is that hydropower is often sort of labeled as green, but it comes with some really heavy environmental impacts that are often overlooked and are pretty apparent on the Naugatuck and in this particular site. So you're not just disrupting the flow of water and sediment, but we're accumulating all that sediment. It creates the water quality impacts I mentioned. There's destruction of the habitat underneath all that sediment. It deprives the natural flow of sediment to downstream reaches, which then thus impairs habitat there. Obviously, it's the migration. It's a barrier to fish migration, as well as just the movement of freshwater fish. So for all of those reasons, green, hydropower we don't particularly like to assign it as a green label. And there is an effort, and we can share resources that are trying to find that balance between which hydropower dams are worth keeping and running and expanding potentially. But this one at such a low generation rate was really not producing a whole lot to the grid. And as has been explained by Aaron, it was the hydropower operators that basically unplugged it in the end because it had fallen into such a state of disrepair that they couldn't keep it running, and they couldn't sell it to anybody else that could either. So we didn't make this decision. It was years of neglect and the reality of the finances and economics of power generation that really were sort of the nail in the coffin for the Kinneytown Dam. The next bullet is, how long will it take from the first breach to the end of the project to complete? This is a complicated one. I don't think we have a good answer on this yet, and I'll let Scott speak to this. I just want to say that there is a lot of construction activity that has to happen leading up to that first breach, the sewer lines being the first major construction effort that needs to happen. Sewer line construction on the east side of the river, getting down into the canal, laying a new sewer line under that canal, having it traverse underneath the railroad tracks through a jacking operation, and then crossing the river. So a new river crossing needs to be constructed. So it's a substantial amount of construction that needs to happen for that sewer line. To the point where we get to the first breach or the first notching of the spillway, to the end of the project is hard for me to pin down. But I could say that the dredging operation could take easily a year, and if not more. So, Scott, you can chime in there.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say at least 2 construction seasons for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, in addition to the siphon work, there's all the prep work that will occur on site at Kinneytown too. All the access, water treatment. So there'll be a lot of work that's going on to set up, and then all the work that occurs with notching the dam, managing the sediment, pumping the sediment, treating the sediment. So I think we're looking at 2 full construction seasons.
I
Yeah.
can chime in here. We do have a question in the chat that pertains to this. So if we can talk about it right now from Anthony Ferrara, number 3, how long would the sediment treatment operation be present? What's the noise level of that operation? And will it be operating 24/7 or on a schedule?
It'll definitely be at least 1 full construction season for all that work. And again, potentially going into 2 construction seasons. So when I say construction season, I'm thinking March, April through September, October. And the work will, I mean, I don't know exactly what the contractor's hours are going to be, but it's 8 to 6 or 7 to 6. And once the dredgers quit working, because that'll be their day. It'll be a regular day. I can imagine them working maybe 5 or 6 days a week. Once the dredgers stop working, that means they're not pumping the sediment, which means sediment treatment goes down. So it won't be 24/7. It'll be, I assume, long construction days and long weeks. But it won't be a 24. It won't be the kind of thing you may be imagining a situation where you're dewatering an excavation. And that dewatering typically has to be 24/7. It won't be that kind of operation.
What will the noise level be? Will the neighbors be impacted?
I mean, we're going to have excavators down in the impoundment. I think it'll be a very low rumble because they're going to be in the valley. The water treatment operation, those kinds of pumps, I mean, it essentially be pumps and generators. So there will be some noise associated with it because it will be down in Copon. But again, you're going to be, I don't remember how many feet that slope is. So it won't be the same kind of noise if they were situated at the same elevation. So I'm not going to lie, there will definitely be some noise, but I think it will be mitigated by the location of it occurring in the valley itself.
Kaylee, I could back up to his first 2 questions there. Why do the sewer siphons need to be relocated? There are actually 3 sewer crossings across the river. 2 of them are upstream of the Kinneytown Dam, and they are in the sediment, but not under the river bottom. So when the dam comes out, they would be suspended above the riverbed, and they'd be exposed. And so they're old enough that it's time to replace them. And then there's another sewer crossing that is downstream of the dam, and that is actually sort of downstream of the sewer treatment plant itself. And so that's not in an ideal location from the sewer system perspective. So all 3 of those are being replaced with a single crossing that will be closer to the sewage treatment plant, but still downstream of the dam. So the sewers can't be left in place because they would be fully exposed to the elements and flow if they were. And then how might the downstream industries be impacted by the dam removal? We don't really anticipate any adverse impacts to the industries. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to. I mean, we are probably most focused on the oyster fishery at the mouth of the Housatonic right now, and we still have some outreach and some analysis to do regarding that. But in terms of like riverside businesses in Ansonia or Derby, there'd be no real reason to assume any disruption there. So I think with that, I'll switch back to the bullets, and I see there's some other comments in the chat too, but I can circle back to those. Once the dam is removed, would one be able to kayak from Seymour to Ansonia? Conceivably, yes. We're still sort of mapping out that river bottom, and there was that steeper section just upstream of the dam that looks to us to become like kind of a steep riffle that might be a little bit tricky to navigate under certain conditions, but generally we'd expect this to be as passable by canoe and kayak as some of the downstream reaches are now. Assuming there's sufficient flow in the river, it should be something that could be paddled. Could be kind of cool, actually. And then the last bullet there, when will the homeowners have to move personal property off the land newly occupied? This is kind of a legal matter. If you were one of the landowners that got a letter about this, you should probably just respond to that letter directly. We don't have a blanket answer, and we're probably not at liberty to really speak specifics about any particular case on this call. Aaron, go ahead and answer that if you want.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. If you did receive a letter, respond to the contact that was included in that letter. The encroachments are all being dealt with on a case-by-case basis, so we really can't speak to those in an open forum.
Yeah. So that's the questions on screen, and then I see other questions there in the chat, so I can move over to that. So would the heavy metal sediment that will be covered with clean fill and left in Copan eventually leach into the river? We believe not. Right now is probably the worst situation we have, which is contaminated sediment at the bottom of Coe Pond with about 17 feet of water pressing down on it. So it's creating a pretty strong hydraulic gradient that could be moving pollutants underground and eventually out to the river. When the project is done and Coe Pond is no longer holding 17 feet of water, that would reduce the hydraulic gradient and the risk of that material being mobilized. It's not to say there would be no water, like no pore water or no groundwater whatsoever, but it would be a drastic improvement over the current conditions, which we think are pretty worst case scenario in terms of the potential for mobility of contaminants out of Coe Pond back into the Naugatuck River. So our clean cap is anticipated to be a substantial improvement over that. And then the question that asked there is the fish ladder at the Ting Dam in downtown Seymour working? Yes, we believe it is. We as in Save the Sound are working with Deep on we just got a grant to explore some new technology for monitoring fish passage, and we're hoping to use the Ting Dam. It's actually a bypass channel, so it's a nature lake channel that goes around the spillway, and then there's a short step pool technical section that fish are able to move up. And Deep has a monitoring station there, a video monitoring station. The video monitoring station is what's not working very well. They believe the fishway is working well, but their ability to monitor it is not working that well. And so we're exploring new technology that is sort of synchronizing with sonar to be able to detect fish bodies as they move through a sonar array, along with some sort of AI counting technology that can use the movement of the fish to help identify it. So that's something we're exploring to help improve the monitoring situation up at Ting Dam going forward. And we're actually starting this summer, hoping to get some pre-removal monitoring data ourselves and be able to potentially use that there permanently installed up there. And then also ideally a technology that can be used outside of fishways and that could really monitor fish movement, say under bridges or in otherwise open channels that aren't restricted fishways. So that's the hope of this technology that's sort of on the horizon. It's being used in other parts of the country. That's all I have for that. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions or anybody, to Scott or Aaron, if anybody has any additional questions.
Yeah, I see no more questions in the chat and I don't see anyone's hands up. So one last call. Otherwise, we will wrap up this meeting. Okay. So thank you all for your thoughtful questions and participation this evening. Community input is an important part of this process, and your continued engagement helps ensure that the project decisions are informed by local knowledge, concerns, and priorities. If you would like to stay informed about future updates, project milestones, and additional opportunities for public involvement, please be sure to sign up for our project communications, which we shared in the chat and we will share again. And I see a question here about the presentation being available online, and it will be. So you can see it on the NVCOG page. And if you're signed up for our newsletters, we will be sharing a link directly to that as well. On behalf of the project partners, thank you again for joining us tonight and for your interest in the future of the Naugatuck River and the Kinneytown Dam Removal Project. Have a wonderful evening and get home safe.
Thanks, Kaylee.
Thanks all.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody.
Take care.